let's take a look at our second portion of fractions here. Did you guys hear about the Apple Watch? That's what this cartoon's about. Yeah. Do you know they have one they're selling for like 10 grand? But it's like made of solid gold, so that's why. Yeah. No, gold is not heavy. It's not a heavy subject. No. Well, it's not that heavy of a metal.
The one that's like plated gold is actually like 22,000.
All right, we're off track. I mentioned gold, and all of a sudden you guys are distracted. Okay, so everybody put your phones away, okay? Let's make sure we're focused here. So last time we talked about fractions was just in very general terms. We described what a fraction was. We described how to simplify a fraction, how to make it simpler. And I gave you a method for that. I'll show you the method in a second. But that was the language of the last time, was this is what a fraction is, this is what simplifying was. And yes, last time I talked about factors. So it was a little disappointing that you guys didn't know what factors meant, because I talked about it. Okay? The method of simplifying was these steps. I'm not going to do another example for you guys, but know that this was a step-by-step how to simplify a fraction was part of what we did last time. And you need to practice that if you want to get better at it. Okay, but we're moving on today. So let's talk about how to make two fractions, quote, the same. Okay? So we talked about factors, which are numbers that you could divide evenly into another number without a remainder if you do it by hand, or without a decimal if you do it by calculator. Then we looked at how you could find a common factor between both the top number and the bottom number, the numerator and the denominator, of a fraction, and that you could use that number to create a simpler number for both the top and the bottom, which was called simplifying. Today we're going to look at another way we can find things that are common. Okay? So here's the example. Here's two fractions. 1/3 and a picture that represents one of three parts, and 7/10. Okay? So if I asked you to add these and you were just given the pictures, it's hard. How do you do this with just the pictures? And most likely, most math problems at this level, at the grade 9 level, are not going to give you pictures. Pictures, we've moved beyond pictures to just working with the symbols. Now, what about these two fractions though? 3/8 and 4/8. Now, forgetting the actual math symbols, if we look at these and I said, here's two chocolate bars. I'm going to give you 3 pieces of one chocolate bar, and I'm going to give you 4 pieces of another chocolate bar, and both of these chocolate bars were chopped up into 8 pieces, and they were the same chocolate bar. And I said, how many pieces would you have? You could easily, look at the little animation, take the pieces you have from both chocolate bars and combine them and say, well, I have 7 out of the 8 pieces of this chocolate bar. This was easier for you because both were divided up into the same amount. Up here, that's not the case. This one is divided into 3 parts, and this one is divided into 10 parts. So it wasn't easy to do. But we want to move beyond the pictures. The pictures can be helpful and hurtful to you understanding this. Okay? This is also similar in the way we do subtraction. If I go, okay, I'm going to give you 7 out of 8 parts. I want you to take away 4 of those 7 out of 8 parts. What? So the way you would do it is you'd go, well, I take 4 away from the 7, and it leaves me with 3 out of the 8 parts. But this was easier because everything was divided up the same. And the reason why it was just divided up the same was we had the same bottom number happening in each time. So here you can see 3/8 plus 4/8 equals 7/8. 3 plus 4. 7/8 minus 4/8 equals 3/8. 7 minus 4. Okay? We take, because the bottom numbers are all the same, we can just do straight up math on the top parts. We can just do 3 plus 4, and we can just do 7 minus 4. It's easier. Okay? But not every problem you're going to get in math is going to give you the same bottom number, the same denominator. Okay? If you have it, you're set. You're done. It's easy. But if you have a different bottom number, that's where it gets harder. That's where you need to find what's called a common denominator. Common means the same. And as you guys mentioned just before we got started today, there are a couple ways you can do this. One is the so-called LCD, or lowest common denominator, but I think that can be confusing to some students. So I don't like to teach that. I like to teach what I call the easiest common denominator. Okay? So here's how we do it. We need a method for finding what I call the easiest common denominator. And I want to say easiest because I want to make it easy for you. It's not necessarily the only way to do it. As you can have maybe heard, there's this one called the lowest common denominator or the least common denominator. You'll hear math teachers use that term. But the way I want to teach you is reliable and simple. Hence the term easiest. Maybe I should have called it the simplest common denominator. Okay. Here's how it works. To find the easiest common denominator between two fractions, multiply the two denominators. Okay? So that's going to be hopefully fairly easy. Then use the answer you get as the new common denominator, the new easy common denominator, or ECD. Then multiply each numerator by the same number that you multiplied the original denominator by to create that ECD. And then write that value as the name numerator. Now, let's see an example of this. Okay? So there are only 4 steps to coming up with the easiest common denominator. So here we go. We have 2 fractions, 1/2 and 2/3. We can't combine them because we have different bottom numbers. So we need to find a common bottom number. And we're going to find the easiest one we can possibly find. So step 1, multiply those 2 things. 2 and 3 multiplied together give us 6. Done. So now we know what the new bottom number is going to be. It's going to be 6. So we know in both fractions, 1/2 and 2/3, they're going to both change to now have a 6 at the bottom. We use 6 because it's the easiest one we can get by just multiplying those 2 numbers together. Now we need a new top number. We can't just put a 1 again because we changed it. The way we come up with the new top number is, again, step 3, multiply the top number by the same number we multiplied the bottom number with to get to 6. So since I multiplied 2 times 3 to get 6, I multiply 1 times 3 to get 3. And over here, since I multiplied 3 times 2, I multiply 2 times 2 to get 4. And this is the easiest common denominator. And we're done. So that becomes your new numerator. 3/6, 4/6. It's just that simple. This is why I call it the easiest common denominator. Let's try it again. Here's 2 fractions. We need a common denominator. Let's not overthink it. Let's just go with the easiest common denominator. Multiply the 2 denominators together. 5 times 4 is 20. So our new common denominator is going to be 20. But now we need a new numerator. Well, in order to get this to 20, I had to multiply 5 times 4. So I do that with the top too. I go 4 times 4. In order for this one to get to 20, I multiplied it by 5. So I multiply this one by 5. So I get 16/20, and I get 10/20. And those are my two new fractions that mean the same as these two, but they have the same bottom number. And so I rewrite them all, and I'm done. So this is a super important step, a 4-step process to come up with the same bottom number for 2 fractions. Once we have that, we can move forward in what we're doing. And it works for any 2 fractions. So here I'm not even going to put numbers. I'm just going to put some crazy letters up there. And as long as I follow those 4 steps, and I'm not going to go through the process with you, give me the common denominator. Give me a new numerator. Put the new numerator and the new denominators together, or the new common denominator together, and I got new fractions that are the same as the original fractions, but have a different bottom number that I can use because it's the same bottom number. That's the process. So now we can move forward. Now that we have a reliable, easy method, and I can't say there is no easier method than the one I showed you for coming up with bottom numbers, now we can move to addition and subtraction. Okay? It starts with that common denominator. Yes, you could still use the lowest common denominator if you're comfortable with that. But I want to give you the easy step, the easy common denominator. Now, with the easiest common denominator, it's possible that the answer you get is not the smallest value you can get. You could still possibly reduce your answer, but I don't want to talk about that today. If you want to learn more about reducing, go back to part 1 where I showed you how to do reducing. We covered it briefly at the beginning there. Okay, let's try it. Adding two fractions together. 1, get a common denominator. If they're already common, just move to step 2. But if they're not common, follow the 4 steps I just said for coming up with a common denominator. Then add the two numerators, just the two top numbers. Keep the same bottom number. Don't change the bottom number. And you're done. Okay, let's try it. 1/5 plus 2/3. So step 1, common denominator. Well, I don't have a common denominator here. 5 and 3 are not the same. So I got to come up with one. So I'm going to go through my 4 steps. Step 1, multiply those two things together. Once I've multiplied 5 and 3 to get 15, I got to come up with new numerators. So I multiplied 5 times 3, I'll multiply 1 times 3. And I multiplied 3 times 5, so I'm going to multiply 2 times 5. So my new fractions are going to be 3 over 15 and 10 over 15. They will replace those two fractions. But that'll get me to the common denominator phase. So now I'm there, multiplied. I can rewrite those as new fractions now. Okay. Now that I have new fractions, I can just straight up add the two top numbers. I can just multiply, I can add 3 plus 10 and give me 13. As far as the bottom number goes, I just use the common denominator. The common denominator of 15 becomes my answer, and I'm done. So 1/5 plus 2/3 equals 13 over 15. Okay? Using this simple method of coming up with a common denominator that's easy, an easiest common denominator. You could call it the ECD if you want. Okay? Let's try another one. Actually, let's try it with subtraction this time. So 2/3 minus 1/2. A problem that for a lot of you guys when you did the diagnostic would have stumped you. I saw it stumped you. So now let's see if the method helps. Common denominator. So multiply the 3 and 2 together. 3 and 2. So we know it's going to be 6. So our final answer is also going to have 6 on the bottom. Okay? We need new numerators. So I multiply as well by the different numbers, and I get 4 over 6 and 3 over 6. Now I just straight up subtract those two numbers. 4 minus 3, which isn't 2. That's a mistake. It's 1 over 6. Of course, I did that on purpose to make sure you guys are paying attention. And we have an answer. All right, let's wrap it up today. All you need to get out of today is the following. The word common denominator is an important word to know for doing adding and subtracting with fractions. A common denominator means that the bottom number of two fractions is the same number. That's crucial. You cannot add or subtract fractions unless that is occurring. How do I get a common denominator? Well, I gave you 4 steps to do that. Once I have common denominator, then I just straight up either add or subtract the numerators, and the denominator is that common denominator. Done. We're going to get to that. We'll get to the mixed number stuff. But I'll show you an example of that right now. Okay? But I just wanted to just wrap that up today. Okay? So I'm glad to hear some of what you guys are asking. That's a great